Dr. Saji sir later in our event. So with this, we have come to an end of the session. So as the participants are leaving, we will starting the presentation session soon. So presenters, please be ready.
So because of the time constraints, all dear ones, please bear with us. We move directly to the presentation session. And then we can move to the paper. Please, sir. Kumar, sir, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, one and all present in this offline and online platforms. I am privileged and honored to be here as a resource person. And I would like to congratulate the organizers, Global Research Conference Forum, GRCF, Maharashtra, and the Department of Law, Central University of Kerala, for having chosen the conference theme, which has a multidisciplinary relevance. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Professor Dr. Prakash Divagaran, the CEO, GRCF, then Professor Dr. Jaishankar, Dean and HOD of this institution, then Professor Dr. Girish Kumar J, the Associate Professor, and all other members of the organizing committee. As we are well aware, this pandemic, COVID-19, is a global challenge that demands researchers, policymakers, and governments address multiple dimensions far beyond the implications of the pandemic for health and well-being. And similar to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, that call for focus on the connections between development policy sectors, the pandemic has exposed the complex global interdependence that underpin economies and highlighted the fault lines in the social structures that perpetuate economic, social, and gender inequalities. And I would like to point out the observations of certain experts through their article published in a recent Lancet research paper entitled COVID-19 as a Global Challenge Towards an Inclusive and Sustainable Future, authored by Helen Lambert and others. They have highlighted the pandemic's emerging potential consequences for achieving sustainable development with respect to certain major global challenge areas. The first and the foremost one is the food crisis. The COVID-19 is having dreadful compounding impact on the global food system, including its effect on the food production, the harvesting and planting, its transport, the processing, and safe distribution to and from local markets. And it's estimated that by 2019, those living with acute food insecurity had increased from 113 million to 135 million. And by 2020, by the end of 2020, it almost doubled to 265 million. Then comes the education crisis. Most governments have shut schools to enforce the social distancing. And the UNESCO has estimated that 60% of the world's students' population has been affected globally. Then the health crisis. It produces a wide variety of health challenges, as we know. It's ranging from constraints on our health systems to difficulties in delivering and accessing health services. Then rising childhood malnutrition and reduction in our physical activities, then stoppage of routine surgeries, health checkups, which is definitely needed for preventing the communicable diseases. Next comes the complex medical issues. Then with regard to other issue, the mortality rates, the increase in the domestic violence and mental problems that paved the way for another dreadful consequences like drug abuse. And as you know, our young girls are being engulfed by this drug abuse, which is rampant in worldwide, and with, especially now in Kerala, the situation is worst, and the government has taken ample measures to contain it. Then comes the suicide rates as a consequence of mental health problems generated by this pandemic. The suicide rates and attempts have been increased. Then our youngsters are being compelled to dedicate their times day and night to the searching dark webs to getting the narcotic drugs, imposing great threats to our enforcement system. Then definitely the next crisis is with regard to economic crisis for the industries as well as individuals, especially with regard to Kerala, there's a setback that has given to the tourism industry or department in Kerala. Then the individuals have been affected by environmental crisis. The lockdowns led to substantial losses of their jobs. Further, the migrants who form the bulk of Kerala's society, migrant workers, stranded while facing sudden unemployment. Then comes the urban planning crisis, the limitations of the precarious spaces in which people live and work mean it is virtually impossible to isolate those with symptoms. Then, as mentioned earlier by our Dr. Krishnamurthy sir and Sanisa, the environmental crisis. The COVID-19 brings a short-term climate dividend, especially with the benefits, including cleaner air. But the post-pandemic economic recession diverted our attention from the climate crisis. The renewal packages missed the opportunities for restructuring towards greener technologies. Many countries are planning big investments in fossil fuel industries. For instance, in Europe and US, the governments have agreed financial aid to aviation sector with no binding environmental conditions. Last but not the least, human rights crisis. As noted by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, there has been an alarming increase in police brutality and civil rights movements under the guise of emergency measures. To control the spread, almost all states restricted the people's movement. Here, the displaced individuals, migrant workers, and marginal populations they were denied access to healthcare, economic nets, and recovery states. They were scapegoated as a threat to settled populations, reinforcing their isolation and exclusion. Coming to India, a specific issue faced by our sex workers have to be addressed or pondered. The pandemic has caused loss of earnings of the workers, further adding their plight on their health vulnerability. It has been earlier also found that the schemes which were meant for them does not reach them due to political and other reasons, especially due to the lack of identity proofs. Against this backdrop, a pro bono committee filed a writ petition before the Apex Court for claiming relief for the sex workers for the monthly rations, then cash transfers, and pandemic prevention measures in the form of masks, sanitation, etc. And to get the access to the aid control societies and other community-based organization support. And the court ordered immediate relief to the hapless victims of sexual exploitation, and Maharashtra became the first state to implement it. And this finally culminated in the recent Supreme Court decision in Buddhadev Kameshwar versus State of Bengal, recognizing prostitution as a profession and that sex workers are entitled to dignity and equal protection. Then another controversial issue in the wake of this pandemic is the violation of privacy rights. Even though our state, Kerala, which has earned the prize within India and outside for flattening of the infection curve, the Kerala government is in the dock for allegedly breaching privacy of about 1.75 lakh people under quarantine by striking a deal with US-based techno company Sprinkler. And in 2020, a division bench of the Kerala High Court, comprising of Justice Devan Ramachandran and Justice T.R. Ravi, issued direction to Sprinkler to ensure that it does not misuse sensitive COVID-19 data. And recently, in July 2022, another petition was filed against our government, state government, to state the legal status of the agreement between Sprinkler and the state government for the collection of data of the COVID patients and whether it had facilitated the sale of data for price. And here we can see a conflict or contradiction as posed by the artificial intelligence vis-a-vis privacy rights of the individuals. In this context, I would like to further highlight that it has to be noted that these crises, as I have stated, are not novel. Even before this pandemic, these crises existed, but were caused by different factors and were addressed separately. But the pandemic generated and aggravated these crises simultaneously across the globe, obliterating the differences between rich and poor countries, black and white countries, the so-called black and white countries, and necessitated a single platform for the intersection of different branches of study as chosen in the present international conference: management, science, commerce, technology, law, and human rights. And I would like to add another thing also. It is only because of the pandemic today we are able to join this conference online. Though we had video conferencing facilities, online transactions and interactions became popular only after pandemic. And even as you are aware, even our Supreme Court has started live telecasting of the proceedings, thanks to COVID. Next, the pandemic helped us to identify transformative opportunities such as impetus provided by temporary shifts in our working practice and culture, the transport patterns, as well as the pandemic has also offered us collective glimpse of alternative possible futures and opportunities. Experts from all branches of study have to collaborate to tackle the issues as addressed by the discussion. The issues posed by the pandemic have to be addressed and managed. For this, experts, especially management experts and legal experts, should join hands. With this intro, I welcome the paper presenters to the conference. All the best.